This is a full story. Kitten wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. After the breakup, I ran into my wealthy ex-girlfriend in the elevator. She glanced at the child in my arms, and for the first time, she seemed shaken. But what flashed through my mind was the memory of her walking into a gala with a famous actor, chatting and laughing. At that time, I felt so inferior that I didn't even have the courage to break up with her. Years later, I was invited to return to the country. She blocked my way with reddened eyes. "Don't avoid me. Tell me you can't let me go. Say that you've regretted every day since the breakup. Admit that I'm the only one you've ever loved. If you say it, I'll give you anything." The next time I saw Haley, summer had just ended. It was my sister's 31st birthday, and my brother-in-law had booked a hotel to celebrate. I was holding my niece as we entered the elevator. While I was momentarily distracted, the little girl pointed to a poster and asked curiously, "Uncle, isn't this lady pretty?" I looked at the woman on the poster and froze. It was Haley. I had heard that she had thrived in recent years, her business empire spanning the globe. My niece seemed intrigued and pointed to the name on the poster, asking, "Uncle, what does this say?" For a long moment, I was silent, my chest tightening with emotion. Memories, like grains in a sieve, poured over me. The elevator dinged open, and I heard my own voice. "Haley." My niece giggled, but beside me, a calm yet melodious female voice asked, "Sir, were you just referring to me?" That voice. I looked up and met Haley's almond-shaped eyes. Time seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Haley stared at me intently, as if in disbelief, but soon, she regained her usual calm composure. "I never thought we'd meet again after all these years, and in such a setting." She tugged at her lips in a faint, pale smile. "Rocky, it's been a while." I nodded. Even now, I didn't have the courage to say much to her. Fortunately, the elevator stopped at my floor. I almost fled with my niece in my arms. Behind me, I heard her anxious voice. "You have a child?" I was about to answer, but my niece beat me to it. "Auntie, this is my uncle. Handsome, isn't he? He's not married, and he's still single." I exhaled heavily, my chest tightening with pain. Under Haley's intense gaze, I ended up running away. Later during the banquet, I stepped outside for some air. Inhaling deeply, I blew out a perfect white smoke ring. Leaning against the window, I quietly watched the bustling traffic below. The past few years hadn't been kind. At my lowest, I had to split a penny in two to make ends meet. Thankfully, I finally turned things around. The atmosphere was quiet. The approaching footsteps carried a deliberate weight. I looked up to see Haley standing a few meters away, hands in her pockets, her gaze unreadable. "Picking up smoking now? You never had bad habits like this before." She's always been inscrutable. Lowering my gaze, I expertly stubbed out the cigarette. Surely, CEO Haley didn't come just to scold me for this trivial indulgence? My footsteps echoed sharply in the empty space as I walked past her. Each step pounded on my heart. When I was beside her, she suddenly grabbed my arm. Her breathing was uneven. "Rocky, don't you have anything to say to me?" Her voice was fervent, almost pleading. Only then did I look up, meeting her slightly reddened eyes. "What is there to say between exes? Should we reminisce? Rekindle old feelings?" "Rocky, don't soften. You can love anyone now, but not Haley." I repeated it to myself again and again. A wise horse doesn't graze on pastures it has left behind. Haley averted her eyes and asked instead, "Where have you been all these years? I've been searching for you, but there was never any news." I scoffed lightly. "Why look for me?" To me, my leaving was no different from Haley losing a pet cat. Today, she might pity me and give me extra food. Tomorrow, she might fancy someone else and I'd starve. I was merely a pet Haley once kept. Seeing my indifferent expression, Haley stared at me, as if trying to see into my soul. "Rocky, you're as ruthless as ever, leaving me without a word. How could you?" Back in college, Haley and I were in a relationship. I was just a student then, while she had already taken over her family's massive enterprise. Her social circle was vast, filled mostly with wealthy heirs. As someone from a small town, I always felt out of place among them. She was considerate, handling every detail in our relationship. While my peers were stressing over exams, Haley showed me a broader world. We rode boats in London, admired art in Paris, and raced down sunlit American highways. In Rome, the extravagant spending was jaw-dropping. What she spent in one night could fund an average family for a year. Haley was undoubtedly an amazing partner, but for me, it always felt like I didn't belong in her world. Our socioeconomic gap loomed over us, defining our relationship. Unlike other couples, I couldn't text her anytime, anywhere. I didn't want to disrupt her busy schedule. When we hung out with her friends, they never asked for my name, as if I was just Haley's well-kept canary. In this relationship, I was always beneath her, and she held all the control. Things changed the day I saw her attending a gala, escorted by a famous actor. They looked perfect together. Unlike me, it wasn't jealousy, it was inferiority. worthy. That overwhelming sense of inadequacy crushed me completely. I hated the version of myself that didn't belong in Haley's world, and that's why I couldn't stay by her side. With her around, I would always feel like I had a crutch. So, one ordinary night, I quietly moved out of the apartment she had bought for me. No breakup, no goodbyes. I broke my SIM card and severed all ties. I vowed that the next time we met, I would be someone worthy of standing beside her. Those years, I lived in another city, saving every penny and facing poverty head-on. Years later, I became a senior jewelry designer, was offered a high-paying job back home, and established myself in this city. I know my decision back then was selfish from Haley's perspective, but that wasn't the life I wanted. Even if we had stayed together, we wouldn't have been happy. Breaking away from my memories, I looked at Haley. She seemed more mature than she did a few years ago. I let out a long sigh. Over the years, my mindset has changed significantly. I weigh the pros and cons more often, think things through carefully. Just like now, between Haley and me, there's also the estrangement and indifference of years apart. She is clinging to the version of me from college, like a pure, untouchable memory engraved deeply in her heart. That feeling is something I can no longer give her. I looked at Haley and sighed softly. I know, I left too abruptly back then. Haley, there's no future for us. What you're holding on to now means nothing to me anymore. I turned to leave, but Haley wouldn't let me. She pulled me into the stairwell, her feminine presence pressing against me. Caught off guard, Haley pushed me into the corner. I was angry and embarrassed. Let go. Haley, with reddened eyes, stood firm, unwilling to budge. I won't. I let go once before, but this time, no matter what, I won't let you leave. Before I could react, Haley kissed me forcefully. The more I struggled, the tighter she held me. In the midst of our breaths, she buried her head in my chest. Her salty tears soaked through my shirt. She was crying. This was the first time I'd ever seen Haley cry in front of me. In the quiet, cramped space, her trembling voice broke through her sobs. Don't avoid me. Rocky, tell me you can't forget me. Tell me you've regretted every day since we broke up. Tell me I'm the only one you've ever loved in your life. If you say it, I'll give you everything. In the hazy atmosphere, I couldn't utter a single word. Only now did I finally understand. Even Haley could lose control of her emotions. But this loss of control might not even be because of me. Maybe it's due to her own struggles or years of unresolved feelings toward me. But she already has someone else. Why come back to entangle with me? I lowered my eyes and gently pushed her away. If I said it, would you believe me? As our eyes met, I saw the light in Haley's eyes dim bit by bit. When I stepped out of the stairwell, my sister was looking for me. Seeing my unusual expression, she asked with concern, "What's wrong?" I smiled and shook my head. Just needed some fresh air. Let's go back. My sister gave me a teasing look. Alice told me that Uncle ran into a beautiful woman in the elevator today. Rocky, do you know who she is? She was my girlfriend from college. A flicker of surprise crossed my sister's face. I've been telling you all these years to give the girls around you a chance. You've always refused. Was it because of her? I shook my head, feeling conflicted. No, sis, it's not. Sensing my unease, my sister didn't press further. She smiled and held my hand. I have my own family now, so naturally, I hope someone will take care of you. But more than that, I want you to be happy. If staying single makes you happy, then so be it. She gave me a reassuring smile. Indeed, over the years, there's been no shortage of women around me. They're attentive, beautiful, smart, gentle, and considerate. But I no longer have the courage to start a new relationship. The truth is, the problem lies with me. I've gradually lost the ability to love. On Monday morning, my assistant Jack stood in my office, reporting the day's tasks. I was engrossed in designing while listening intently. After finishing his report, Jack hesitated noticeably. Rocky, a woman just came to see you. She's quite pretty. I put down my pencil and looked at Jack. Did she leave her name? No, she just specifically asked to see you. I glanced at my watch and nodded. Take her to the conference room. I'll be there shortly. When I opened the conference room door, I understood why she asked for me. Haley was there, wearing a simple black dress, exuding a rare air of ease. Her dark eyes shifted slightly as she saw me enter. From the moment I walked into when I sat down, her gaze never left me. Haley, you're quick to act. Already tracking down my studio. I smirked, glancing at the woman sitting opposite me. Catching the sarcasm in my tone, Haley seemed unfazed. Rocky, I'm here today to discuss a collaboration. I looked at her, remaining silent. I want you to design an engagement ring for me. Her dark eyes were clear and captivating, carrying an unexplainable allure. more. I pressed my lips together and took a sip of coffee. It's foolish not to make money, especially from someone like Haley, who has plenty to spare. Out of professional courtesy, I still asked, "May I ask what the ring is for?" Haley's lips curved into a lazy smile. "For my wedding." As she said this, her gaze softened, holding a warmth I had never seen before. The coffee spilled from my cup as my hand trembled slightly. Her fiancé. Could it be that actor? It made sense. Only a custom ring could match his status. Haley gave me a meaningful look. "What's wrong? Is it too difficult?" "No." Suppressing the bitterness in my chest, I looked at Haley. "If you have specific requirements for the ring, you can discuss them with my assistant. I'll finalize the design later." Her brows arched slightly, leaving me no room to refuse. "It's better to discuss with you directly. My boyfriend is particular. If he's not satisfied, won't it be trouble for me?" Sensing I was about to decline again, Haley added more pressure. "Rocky, we're old acquaintances. Can't you do me this one favor?" With that, she glanced toward the colleagues outside the room. The implicit threat in her tone was clear. Fine, she won. I didn't want to turn this into public gossip. As I added her on WeChat, a satisfied smile tugged at Haley's lips. After getting my contact information, Haley surprisingly remained silent. She didn't send me a single message or inquire about the progress of the design. This situation suited me perfectly. It spared me the constant anxiety every time we met, but fate has a way of playing tricks. I never expected to meet that actor again after so many years. When I got home, he was just leaving the apartment across from mine. In a rush, we bumped into each other at the elevator. "Rocky." His voice carried a trace of surprise as he called my name. I turned around, startled that he even knew who I was. He seemed calm, pointing tentatively toward my apartment. "Do you live here?" I nodded. "Yes, I bought this place not too long ago." Understanding dawned on him, and he chuckled softly. "Right, I haven't introduced myself. I'm Haley's brother. My name is Tony." "Her brother?" Tony extended a friendly hand toward me. "So, the man who attended the gala with Haley back then was her biological brother?" I wondered why my sister suddenly decided to buy a place here. "It must have been because of you," Tony said with a meaningful smile. "If it's convenient, could I come in for a bit?" "Oh, sure, of course." Still processing the shock, I belatedly invited Tony inside. "Would you like something to drink?" "Just water is fine." I smiled at him as I handed over a glass. Tony had a clean-cut look and subtly observed me from the moment he entered. His gaze was probing yet gentle. "Aren't you curious how I know your name?" Seated across from him on the sofa, I lowered my gaze quietly. "It must have something to do with Haley." Tony took a sip of water before speaking, his expression solemn. "It was only after you two split that I learned about you. My sister went crazy looking for you, digging everywhere, but nothing turned up. You might not believe it, but Haley has always been aloof. This was the first time I'd seen her act this way over a man. I told her maybe you had your reasons, and that fate would bring you back together. But after months of searching for you, she slowly gave up, and I watched her spiral into despair. One day, I went to check on her, and I don't think I'll ever forget what I saw. She was lying in the bathtub, a deep gash on her wrist. My mind went blank as if struck by a thunderclap. Haley, she had attempted suicide because of me." Tony, unable to hold back, started sobbing. A chill spread across my back as my blood froze. Covering his face, Tony choked out his words. I panicked and called for an ambulance. In those hours outside the operating room, 1,000 terrible thoughts crossed my mind. Thankfully, she was saved in the end. When Haley woke up, completely despondent, the first thing she said to me was, "Why did you save me?" The once proud and vibrant sister I knew was utterly destroyed. Tears streamed down his face, unstoppable. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as though my heart was being crushed. "I never knew any of this. Mr. Tony, I'm so sorry." Tony gradually calmed down, wiping his tears before shaking his head with a faint smile. "It's not your fault. My sister's just too stubborn. Once she loves someone, it's that person for life. She might seem indifferent on the surface, but she loved you down to her very bones. Now that you're back, whether you reconcile or not, I just hope you two can clear up your misunderstandings." Tony stood up, giving my shoulder a firm pat. I looked into his eyes and saw encouragement there, as if to say, "It's okay." A wave of guilt overwhelmed me. "I think I need time to process everything about Haley and me." I shook Tony's hand and eventually nodded. Friday night, young men and women swayed freely to the rhythm in the dance floor. Not far away in a booth, we were celebrating our friend Peter's birthday. Noticing my absent-mindedness, Peter sat down next to me. "Who would have thought Haley was so devoted?" "Even I was shocked to hear all that," he said seriously, without his usual playful demeanor. "I always thought Haley was just a spoiled rich girl who wasn't that into you. But now, it seems I was wrong." I looked up at Peter, who gave a faint smile. "Years ago, ago, Haley came looking for me. She looked so haggard, like she'd lost her spirit. She kept asking me where you were. I was annoyed at the time, so I refused to tell her. Looking back now, if I had told her then, maybe she wouldn't have tried to end her life. Peter sighed heavily, guilt written all over his face. Before downing his drink in one gulp, I lowered my gaze, my heart heavy with sorrow. After a moment, I pressed my lips together. I'm heading home. You guys enjoy yourselves. Before Peter could respond, Shin Yu-Chu stood up. I haven't been drinking tonight. I'll drive you home. I glanced at Peter, who shrugged innocently. Shin Yu-Chu was a high school classmate of ours. Since I returned to the country, she's been openly pursuing me. Peter once mentioned that she had a crush on me in high school, but I had been too oblivious to notice. There's no need. I'll just call a cab. I replied with a polite smile, but Shin Yu-Chu insisted. You've been drinking. It's safer not to get a cab. Besides, I'll pass by your place on my way home. Seeing the earnest look on her face, I couldn't bring myself to refuse again. My home was very close to the bar, just about a 10-minute walk. The night was cool and tranquil, with only our shadows under the streetlights. I smiled at Shin Yu-Chu. Thank you for taking the trouble to bring me home so late. My sincere tone seemed to embarrass her. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, smiling. No need to be so polite. After a pause, she took a deep breath, appearing a bit nervous. Do you have time this weekend? I'd like to invite you to dinner. Sorry, I might need to work overtime this weekend. I looked at her with slight regret. She quickly waved it off, eager to avoid troubling me. It's fine. You've just returned to the country. Work must be hectic. If you ever have time, feel free to contact me anytime. I met her gaze. Honestly, I'm really sorry, but I don't have such intentions for now. Maybe you could consider someone else instead of wasting your time on me. My firm refusal froze the smile on her face. In some ways, both Haley and I were equally stubborn. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. Her gaze burned with intensity. Rocky, I'll wait for the day you finally see me, perhaps to avoid further rejection. She quickly got into her car. I sighed softly only after the vehicle disappeared into the night. Feelings are such tormenting things. No matter how many times I declined, Shin Yu-Chu still held onto her sincere heart, hoping she could eventually move me. But unfortunately, gratitude is not love. I could never return Shin Yu-Chu's feelings. Pulling my coat tighter, I quickened my pace toward the elevator. The elevator door dinged open. A wave of alcohol hit me instantly. Haley was sitting slumped at my doorstep, her face full of exhaustion. Even in such disarray, she still exuded an air of elegance that was hard to ignore. At her feet lay a pile of empty bottles. How much had she drunk? My brow furrowed as we silently locked eyes. This was the first time I had seen Haley look so pitiful. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and after a long silence, she finally asked softly, "Are you?" She didn't finish the sentence. The words dissolved in her throat. My hands clenched involuntarily, fingers turning pale from the pressure. "Am I what?" She hesitated, struggling to get the words out. "The woman who just sent you home. Are you two together?" Haley looked worn out, her usually captivating eyes now brimming with anguish, as if they might bleed. So, she had been drinking tonight because of this? It's not what you think. I looked at her and reached out to help her up. She swatted my hand away, a trace of grievance in her eyes. After a moment, she smiled bitterly. "Rocky, what am I to you?" With those words, she stood up, kicked aside a can in front of her, and stumbled toward the elevator. Haley disappeared just like that, without even hearing a single word of explanation. That night, I slept uneasily, dreaming of my past with Haley. The memories played like a slideshow in my mind. It was the happiest birthday I'd ever had. Haley had put a watch on my wrist, promising to love me alone for life. Under the envious eyes of others, we embraced and kissed. I've always been a light sleeper, but Haley would wait until I fell asleep first. Whenever I woke from a nightmare, she would gently pat me. "Rocky, it's okay. Don't be scared. It's just a dream." During those countless nights abroad, only I knew how much I craved Haley's presence, but all that answered me was the cold emptiness of the room. I admit, I was a coward. I didn't dare to show her how deeply I loved her, fearing she would look down on me for it, and I couldn't stand sharing her with another man. That's why I never returned to the country in those years. I was terrified of hearing news of her marriage. When I woke from the dream, the clock on the wall showed 2 a.m. I got up and poured myself a glass of water. Just then, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered, and the noisy background could be heard on the other end. A woman's voice came through, carrying a hint of relief. "Brother-in-law, thank goodness you answered." Haley said she wanted to drink with us tonight, but after entering the private room, she started drinking recklessly, no matter who tried to stop her. We couldn't hold her back. She's completely drunk and unconscious now. I think it's probably because because of you. Do you have time to come pick her up? My temples throbbed violently. I quickly asked for their location. When I arrived at the bar, Haley's childhood friend Mary was waiting for me at the entrance. Brother-in-law, you're finally here. Haley's still asleep inside. Was it you who called me just now? Yes, it was me. When I called, Haley was still murmuring your name. I paused mid-step. Mary turned to look at me, puzzled. What's wrong? I forced a pale smile. Nothing. As soon as I entered the private room, I saw Haley fast asleep. Even in her drunken state, she still slept so delicately. Her fair skin was tinged with a soft pink, making her even more endearing than when awake. I carried Haley to the back seat of the car. Just as I was about to leave, Mary suddenly called out to me. Brother-in-law, I know it's presumptuous to call you that given your current relationship, but it's what Haley insisted on. We've never called anyone else that way. The streets were nearly deserted at this hour. In the quiet atmosphere, I leaned against the car with my hands in my pockets. Back then, none of you even asked for my name. I chuckled softly. The fact that I was seen as Haley's kept man had always irked me. Mary, of course, noticed. You've misunderstood. That's not what Haley meant at all. She said you were young and easily embarrassed. If we focused too much attention on you, it would only make you uncomfortable. In private, we've only ever acknowledged you as her brother-in-law, no one else. These years haven't been easy for Haley. As her friends, it's not our place to say much. When she wakes up, you can ask her yourself. I let out a long sigh. Whenever I was around Haley's friends, they always treated me with care. They never looked down on me because of my different background. It turned out Haley had paved the way for me long ago. I laughed at myself. How much more had she done without telling me? The 10-minute drive home felt like an eternity. By the time we arrived, Haley was already half awake. As the elevator slowly ascended, we remained silent, a tacit understanding hanging in the air. Why did you buy the apartment across from mine? I broke the silence with a soft question. Haley tilted her head slightly, then answered truthfully, I wanted to see more of you. Without another word, I stepped out of the elevator ahead of her. Since staying over at my place was no longer an option, Haley obediently entered her own passcode and unlocked her door. Just as I was about to tell her to get some rest, she suddenly pulled me into her apartment with unexpected strength. In the darkness, Haley deftly closed the door behind us. She pressed me against it, stood on her tiptoes, and kissed me. The kiss, laden with the taste of alcohol, descended upon me like a tidal wave. Her movements were seamless, without a hint of hesitation. Haley's kiss was fervent and uncontrollable. In my dazed state, I wrapped my arms tightly around her slender waist. The woman flicked on the light near the entryway. Instantly, the room was bathed in a warm glow. Leaning against my chest, Haley's eyes sparkled with passion. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have ignored your explanation. I waited for you for hours tonight. When I saw that woman sending you home, I was overwhelmed with jealousy and lost control. Her expression was like a child who had made a mistake, eager for my forgiveness. How long had it been since I'd seen this shy, girlish look on Haley's face? I couldn't even remember. My cheeks burned, my entire face feeling ablaze. Patiently, I explained, it's not what you think. She likes me, but I didn't agree to it. Haley chuckled lightly. I know. Her gaze grew warmer, her dark eyes glimmering like starlight. Suddenly, I scooped Haley into my arms. With a hoarse voice, I whispered near her ear, Haley, I can't hold back anymore. The next morning, I woke up in Haley's bed. Slipping on my slippers, I walked out of the room. Haley was in the kitchen, making porridge. When she saw me, she placed a steaming bowl of millet porridge on the dining table. Here, try my cooking. I sat on the high chair, the aroma of the porridge enticing my taste buds. But as my spoon aimlessly stirred the white porcelain bowl, I realized I had no appetite. Looking at Haley, who was still busy, my expression darkened. What happened to your wrist? My words. Haley's movements stilled. She turned to face me, seemingly unable to meet my gaze. I walked over to her, intending to hold her hand, but Haley stopped me. Don't look. It's ugly. Ignoring her, I insisted on taking her hand. When my fingers brushed over the scar, my eyes filled with tears. The scar was so deep, I didn't dare to think about what could have happened. If Tony hadn't visited her that day, I couldn't bear to imagine the outcome. If Haley had really taken her life because of me, I would have lived in guilt for the rest of my days. Haley gently wiped my tears. Why are you crying? See, I'm fine now. I gripped her hand tightly. How could you be so foolish? She sighed softly, wrapping her arms around my waist. During the first 6 months when I couldn't find you, I hated you to the core. I hated you for coming into my life, only to leave me behind. But gradually, I came to realize it must have been my fault. I wasn't good enough, so you left. But trust me, from the moment we got together, I made up my mind. I swore I'd marry you in this lifetime. The gentler Haley's words became, the harder I cried. These years had truly been hard on her. Flustered, she wiped my tears. Then she leaned in and kissed them away. Rocky, you're my curse. I've spent these years hating you, but I can't bear to see you suffer even a little. Even seeing you cry makes my heart ache. Am I doomed to be stuck with you for the rest of my life? I admit, I had been too willful back then, but some things still needed to be said. There were too many misunderstandings between Haley and me. I pulled Haley to sit down on the sofa. Back then, when I was with you, I actually felt very insecure. I was just a penniless college student, and you were already successful in your career. I was afraid that in others' eyes, I wasn't worthy of you at all. I didn't dare share my happiness with you, let alone my sadness. Because I knew you were busy, I worried about disturbing your work. In this relationship, I've always been the insecure one. Your personality is always so calm and indifferent, which made me feel even more like you were just playing around with me, treating me as a caged bird you kept. When I finished speaking, Haley looked at me in disbelief. Her tone was firm. I've never thought that way. It seemed she finally understood the misunderstanding between us. Haley appeared enlightened, as if she had a sudden realization. Rocky, how could you have so many misconceptions about our relationship? She leaned into my arms and asked, do you know why I like you? I shook my head, and Haley patiently explained to me, piece by piece. The first time I saw you was at Jingning Cemetery. You were wearing a plain white shirt, holding a bouquet of chrysanthemums. I was there to visit my late father. It was raining heavily that day, soaking my clothes. As I passed by you, you handed me an umbrella. I asked what about you, and you said your home was nearby. Later, I watched you run into the rain. By the time I came to my senses and tried to find you again, you were already gone. Haley chuckled softly. You were the first guy I'd met who was so kind that he'd rather get wet himself just to give an umbrella to someone in need. After that, I used my connections to find you and be with you. Back then, I thought we'd get married once you graduated from college, but your personality is so independent. You didn't want to rely on me because of my status. You weren't like other guys who would cling to me, wanting to be with me 24/7. Actually, I'm quite possessive. When I saw you getting close to other women, I'd get jealous. When I saw you happily chatting with your classmates, I'd even resent myself for not being a student and not having common topics with you. So, I could only pretend not to care and respect all your decisions. Was that why you misunderstood and thought I didn't love you? I had never heard Haley speak like this before. It turned out she cared about me so much. Now that everything was laid bare, I said, because of all this, I didn't dare show you my love. I was afraid you'd look down on me. A caged bird isn't supposed to love its master. I didn't dare express my feelings to you, fearing that I'd end up getting hurt. Haley kissed the corner of my lips with a heartache. Fool, in this relationship, I'm the one who's insecure. I was afraid you'd think I had nothing besides money. I even thought, even if you only loved me for my money, at least that's something I have. But unfortunately, what you value has never been these things. I felt a tremor in my heart. Finally, I confessed something that had been bothering me. Actually, that wasn't the only reason I left. At the time, I thought Tony was your real boyfriend. Haley was shocked by this. Rocky, why didn't you ever ask me? Back then, I was just accompanying my brother to a business gala. Piece by piece, we cleared up the misunderstandings of the past. Only then did I realize how deep the misconceptions between Haley and me had been. That day, Haley lay in my arms and talked about many things. She didn't fall asleep until she was completely exhausted. I kissed her lips gently and carried her to the bedroom, tucking her in. Since Haley and I reconciled, she couldn't bear to leave my side. She wanted to take me everywhere, afraid I'd disappear again. I understood she was still afraid I'd leave her. The joy of regaining what was lost was something I shared too. The stronger the happiness, the more intense the insecurity that followed. Even though I kept reassuring Haley that I wouldn't leave her again, at night, she still instinctively held me tightly in her sleep, as if she wanted to merge me into her life. Tony was naturally happy for us too. When he saw us together, he laughed until he cried. A month later, I proposed to Haley. It was in the villa we were preparing for our wedding, with Haley's childhood friend Peter also present. The room was filled with red roses, decorated with the utmost care. Haley looked stunning today, radiant and glowing. I knelt on one knee, gazing deeply into her eyes. In my hand was the diamond ring she had asked me to design for her. I couldn't help but admire her strategy. She had been playing the long game since I returned home. I took a deep breath, suppressing the nervousness in my heart. Haley, this is our 6th year together, but I wasn't by your side for 4 of those years. As the smog outside gradually clears and the light brightens, you're becoming more and more vivid before me. This is just an ordinary day. This morning, you were lying beside me, peacefully asleep in my arms. I found I couldn't take my eyes off you. I didn't want to sleep because I was afraid that once I closed my eyes, you'd disappear again. Maybe you didn't realize it, but in those moments of gazing at you, I made a bold decision. I want to propose to you, no matter how rushed it might feel, no matter if it startles you. This time, it's a genuine proposal. My girl has waited so persistently for me all these years. Now, it's my turn to be brave. I want to take you home. What about you? Will you come home with me? From my perspective, I could see Haley's hands trembling slightly. The crowd around us began to cheer, "Say yes, say yes." In that moment, I felt incredibly lucky. All these years, Haley had been waiting for me. Maybe in countless sleepless nights to come, I'll still recall the thrill of this moment. Haley picked up the ring and slid it onto her finger. From now on, I'll be Mrs. Rocky. The cheers around us grew louder and louder, but Haley's eyes were fixed on me. The moonlight outside was silver bright. Overwhelmed with joy, I pulled her into my arms. Haley cried as she said, "How did I deserve this?" She also said, "You are the best gift this world has given me." What Haley didn't know was that she was the gift heaven had given to me. I never told Haley this. Many years ago, on the day we met at Jingning Cemetery, I had just lost a loved one. I sat quietly on the cemetery steps for a long time, until the sky began to darken. When Haley passed by me, there was a pleasant fragrance about her. Later, as the sky dimmed, it began to drizzle. Haley walked up to me and draped a black coat from her bodyguard over my shoulders. "Your clothes are too thin. Don't catch a cold. It's getting late. Go home soon." Even though she herself was already shivering from the cold, her gaze was warm and comforting. Perhaps Haley will never understand how much solace such a simple gesture gave me at the time. I nodded, noticing her clothes getting wetter in the rain. I rummaged through my bag and handed her an umbrella. I didn't expect such a small gesture to leave such a lasting impression on her. In my darkest moment, Haley passed by and sheltered me with an umbrella. She said, "Bloom freely. I've got you." The end. If you like Kitten's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.